Hello, team. My name is Rob Gallipo, and I'm the newly appointed assessment team leader. I've been appointed team leader because my recent course through ASU, BIS 357, and because of that, I've been also appointed to give you a crash course on organizational assessment. You ask what organizational assessment? It's what we're here for. Assess our organization. Now, it's not as easy as just going out and asking questions. There's a lot to it than that. So what is organizational assessment? I'd put it easily. It's a tool used to evaluate an organization. It's a tool used to identify where improvement is needed within an organization. You explore ways to improve the organization. You explore ways to implement the improvement ideas. You're not just going to assess something, say, this is what's wrong, this is what we're going to do. It's not that easy. You ease into it, I guess. And organizational assessment's important. It's important to the health of the organization. It presents indicators for shifting performance, reveals strengths and weaknesses. It's used in processes and departmental improvement. Identify the multifaceted connections across the wide-ranging enterprise. And their tools are used to identify where an organization needs to improve. Now, assessments aren't necessarily bad. People think they're being assessed because, oh, something's definitely wrong. Assessment can be used just to make it better. You know, the environment around an organization is always changing. The customers always want new things. What was good yesterday may not be so good today. So you assess more than just an organization. You can assess outside the organization and then you figure out how to implement what the environment wants inside. Now here's a picture that I found, and what's wrong with this picture? I mean, that guy's evaluating the car with the lady in it, if you can call that the car. And you look at the picture, what's wrong with the picture? I mean, you start out, there's no motor, or you got square wheels, so maybe you need to assess not the product, you got to assess who engineered the product. Where did these ideas come from? Is it what the environment's asking for? And it goes deep. Assessment can go all kinds of directions. You got to have a good idea what you're looking for while you're assessing. And assessment isn't just a one-time thing. You got to plan your assessment. You got to implement your assessment. While you're implementing, you do the actual assessing. And then you report, you revise, and you start the cycle all over again. It doesn't necessarily stop. You're always looking to improve, and the only way you know how to improve is to continuously assess your organization. And the assessment process, you got to figure out what's the purpose of the assessment. Is there something wrong? Are you simply trying to improve? Assessments, they take time and they take money. So you got to decide how much time you have, what kind of budget are you looking for. I mean, if you go for an external assessment, that's more costly, can be more time consuming than if you do an internal, a self-assessment. What's the overall assessment approach? I mean, what mode are you going to be using? What assessment model are you going to be using? These are all things we'll talk about in a little bit. And how you're going to communicate and use the information. You'll find what's wrong or areas to improve, but you got to you communicate that to the people who need to know. And come up with plans on how to change it and then how to implement the changes. Nothing just straight black and white. You gotta think about it. You gotta have a plan. You gotta have a plan of the assessment, what you're gonna assess, how you're gonna assess. You gotta have a plan on how you're gonna assess. You gotta have a plan on what you find, how you're gonna implement changes, and you gotta be able to communicate that. And how to start planning an assessment. You got to decide what mode you will be using. You decide what model or tool you'll be using assessment. model or tools. There's several out there. We'll be talking about a few shortly. You can decide what department of the organization you'll be assessing, or maybe you want to assess the whole organization. But that's kind of difficult unless you have a large assessment team, which we have. I'm here to give you a crash course, train the trainer sort of thing. And it took me 6 weeks to learn what I know now, and we have a short time today. So you're not going to learn what I learned in 6 weeks, but I'm hoping to be able to touch on some of the key parts so that you have a better idea, and then we can go from there. You can decide what you'll be looking at to assess. I mean, there's so many things to look at. Are you going to look at the process? Are you going to look at the culture of the organization? You can be looking at the customers and what they're doing. Maybe they're not happy with the customer service, and you can learn a lot by the customer. In my opinion, by starting outside, external, you can start pinpointing where to begin assessing within the organization. I mean, it may be marketing, it may be engineering, it may be a combination of both. Production may be a little bit out of whack, and you got to figure out how to streamline that. There's so many different directions you can assess. So you got to be, you're not really going to do it all at once, but you can zero in on what you're going to assess. It'll unmuddy the process if you have a strict plan on what you're going for. What questions are you going to ask? You're just not going to come up with a blunt list and go and ask a bunch of people, go down your clipboard and ask a bunch of questions. It's a little bit more than that. You got to think about it a little bit, and you got to think of how you're going to approach people with the questions you're going to ask. You don't want to go in there and, I guess, rock the boat. You got to have some sort of rapport with people, and you be tactful, because to them you may be meddling. So if you can just let them know you're just there for their benefit and the organization's benefit, you're not there to look for just bad. You're looking to make it better. So you may want to communicate that with people with the questions you're asking. Some of the questions may be tough to them and make them gun shy of even asking, because you're kind of an outsider at that point. And there's different assessment modes. You got manager, external. And these are expensive and time consuming. So if your budget ain't very big, you may not want to go external and bring people in for the assessment. And the disadvantage is they don't have an understanding of the goings on within the organization. They're not familiar with the organization. They're kind of learning as they go, or what you have provided them with. And they're outsiders, so people aren't going to warm up so much. You got manage / combination of self-assessment. That's kind of like a department that within an organization whose job is to assess. Advantages: you are familiar with the operations of the organization. You're familiar with the people. Yeah, and that's kind of what we are. We're a team, and I'm the organizational assessment team leader, and our department now will be assessing the organization. And then you got self-assessment, pretty much self-explanatory. Self-assessment, the organization kind of assesses themselves. They try to find the faults and stuff, and I guess self-assessment can be kind of biased, perhaps, or you can be directed for what you're looking for, type deal. People will just tell you what you want to hear, or you may not just fully do a thorough assessment for fear of retaliation, because you can't get away from the people afterwards. You work with them. So, in my opinion, managed self-assessment, it's fairly quickly done. You're familiar with it, and you're not quite so pinned with people telling you pretty much what you want to hear, because you kind of already know the goings on. You're just looking to make it better. And you got assessment models or tools. You got the Malcolm Baldrige Award. your good to great diagnostic, you got lean enterprise self-assessment tool or LESAT, you got the shingle prize for operational excellence. All good tools. Like I said, these are just 4. There's more out there. We're only going to talk a little bit about 2 that I think fit our organization. We'll start with the good to great diagnostic. Based on a book by Jim Collins, it measures criteria around leadership, culture, sustainability, and looks at the outputs of concept implementation, output of performance, superior to mission, and the output of impact on community. And lastly, endurance beyond significant changes. Focuses on leadership with the level 5 leadership, in my opinion, being superior, because leadership is what runs an organization. It what sets the culture, it sets the mood, it sets quite a bit of stuff in how an organization is led. Bad leadership won't do as well as good leadership. The organization will flourish. It looks at organizations that went from good organizations to great organizations, and uses the hedgehog theory. No matter what comes at you, you just keep fighting through it towards success. Now, Collins talked about the hedgehog theory, and it basically talks about a fox that keeps trying to get the hedgehog, and the hedgehog would just ball up, and the fox is going to get the hedgehog because of all the little spines sticking out. The fox was just hurting his mouth by trying to chomp down on the hedgehog. The hedgehog just kept taking whatever was coming at it, not giving up, moving forward, and prevail. And if you think about good to great, companies always got to face bad things in its way. People are always trying to knock them down. There's just a lot of obstacles, and they just keep surpassing the obstacles, and they just keep moving forward and building great. If you think about Southwest Airlines, when they first started down in Love Field, Texas, they were almost bankrupt before their first flight took off because they were faced with all these obstacles. People didn't want them there, but they just kept doing what they had to. They kept fighting forward. And one guy said that anger is quite the motivator, because all these people were just determined that Southwest wasn't going to prevail. Now Southwest is extremely successful, has an outstanding culture. They pride themselves on customer service, and they go above and beyond. One airline attendant dog sat for a guy so he could go on vacation because they wouldn't let him take his dog on the plane. It's against the rules. Stuff like that, stuff that makes you stand out in that level 5 leadership. They're leaders that aren't looking to be recognized. They're leaders that are down there with them. They're right in the trenches. They're doing all the work with them, and they're fighting for a better culture, a better community. They want their employees to want to come to work. Southwest Airlines, their employees do more for less because they don't want to work for other airlines that may pay them more, but the culture's terrible, and so on. Southwest is just an outstanding example of good to great. And you can see on this slide here, build up, breakthrough, the level 5 leadership I talked about. You got first who, then what. Good to great companies, they look at what they have, who they want to work in that environment. They choose the person, and then they choose the what. You hear about organizations that'll buy a whole bunch of equipment and then decide who's going to operate, who's going to run it, who's going to be the foreman. And that's kind of the backwards way of doing it. You want the person that's capable of doing it, the person that's a good fit for it. You got to confront the brutal facts. It's right into the hedgehog concept. You got to roll the punches in order to be successful. You got to keep doing it. Keep fighting through, don't give up. It's the easiest way to describe the hedgehog concept. And the culture of discipline, the culture is a big part of it. Technology accelerators. And there's ways to use technology. Are you working Is the technology the only thing that's bringing you forward? Are you working with the technology? Are you using it to your advantage? And of course, the business culture, scaling of impact. I like the good to great concept. It just seems like a good down American way. People that take their companies and continue to work at them. And you could be in competition with many other companies in the same industry, but what sets you apart is how you go from good to great, surpassing. And a lot of that has to do with how you're reading the environment, the customers, what the customers want, you make it happen, but you also got to have a good workplace, a great culture. Is me personally, I look at job satisfaction over pay. I mean, I have given up jobs that paid great to work in lesser jobs that didn't pay so great, but the culture was fantastic, and I just felt right at home. You got the Malcolm Baldrige Award. You know, it measures leadership, strategic planning, customer focus, measurement analyst, and improvement of organizational performance. Workforce performance measures process management and results. Provides criteria for each level of performance that can guide the transition process. Now that reminds me, if you back up a little bit, when you're evaluating a company, you're also evaluating transitions, because when you have to transition with the environment around you, everything changes. Like if you look at iPhones, for instance, those things are constantly changing, and they're looking at the environment. They're reading what people want. Like Apple iPhones, they just surpassed $1 trillion in value. That's unheard of. They're the first company in history to pass $1 trillion. I saw that news the other day. And it's because they're paying attention to what the environment is around them, what customers are looking for, the apps, the function of the phone, what can it do? I mean, an iPhone has replaced so many different things. I could probably do this presentation on an iPhone. Yeah. And here's more talking about the Malcolm Baldrige Award. You know, it looks at leadership, senior leadership, their governance and social responsibilities, strategic planning, which is also important. You get a strategy when dealing with your competitor strategy for what the environment around you wants, community. The customer focus, customer engagement, focus of the customer. Now, this is for Southwest Airlines. They've, again, pride themselves greatly in their customer service, and it proves. I fly Southwest Airlines all the time, and I really enjoy it. I've flown many airlines, and my best experiences have been on Southwest because they're so engaged with the customer. Customer service is that important to them. Workforce focus, you know, workforce engagement, workforce environment. You know, if you're not happy where you're working, the environment, you're just simply not happy. You pay attention to that. And when you're being evaluated by the Baldrige, they question stuff like that, the workforce environment. Process management, work systems, work processes. Down number 4, measurement analyst and knowledge management. You know, the measurement analyst, improvement of organizational performance. Management information, knowledge, and information technology. And the biggest score in the Baldrige Award when you're being assessed through that tool are the results. You know, and you got the product outcomes, customer focus outcomes, the financial market outcomes, the workforce focus outcomes, process effectiveness outcome, and the leadership outcomes. You know, those are all the scoring guidelines of the Malcolm Baldrige tool. But when you're going to assess, you got to, as I said earlier, you determine what part of the organization you're going to assess. You know, you have specific departments. You're going through all the departments, but looking at certain things. You may be looking at the culture in all the departments, the norms, the informal and formal norms, or the rules. all good important things. So you can be looking at certain personnel, certain operations, the environment. Again, the environment, the customer. Without the customer, most organizations will not exist. Their income comes from their customers, so you have to concentrate on what the customer wants. Maybe the shareholders and the other stakeholders. You got to look at all that stuff. And certain personnel, I mean, that could be the leadership, or that could be marketing personnel, it could be HR personnel. Maybe there could be some improvement there. Back to Southwest Airlines, they changed their name, the human resources, to the people. The people resource, I believe. Anyway, and they stated that their employees are their customers. And the certain thing about Southwest Airlines is that they just don't hire anybody. They will take and look at someone who has no experience compared to someone who does. And if that person who doesn't fit the culture, they'll go with the person with the least experience because they're a better fit for the culture. They feel very strongly in their culture, which then reflects on their customer service. And all that starts with the leadership and the type of environment that that leader wants. You know what you're going to access. What are you looking for? Or better yet, what are you hoping to find? Have the problems already been identified, or are you trying to identify the problems? Are you looking to assess the leadership or personnel under the leadership? Perhaps you're assessing the personnel to learn about the leadership. You got to have a straight, solid plan of what you're going to assess. You're not going to go in there and expect to find everything, because there's so much to assessment, so much to look at, that you got to be more narrowed down. The first thing, what are you looking for? Or better yet, what are you hoping to find? Sometimes it's the problem isn't always clear. You're hoping to find ways to improve. If there's already a problem, then you know what you're looking for. What is that problem? It could be, like I said, it could be the process of production. It could be the leadership doesn't quite fit, or the personnel don't fit. You can start figuring that out, but if you have a general idea where you're going and what you're going for, you can easier go about it, about your assessment. Again, assess the leadership of the personnel. I've always had a saying, especially when I was in the Army, that there are no bad soldiers, only bad leaders. And I think that falls into the civilian world, because the leader's setting the example. Lead by example is another saying I always have. And everybody's watching you and how you act, monkey see, monkey do sort of thing. So you got to be a strong leader. Not exactly a charismatic leader, but at least a level 5 leader, one that's willing to work with everybody. The Southwest Airlines guy, that CEO, it was not uncommon to find him at 2, 3 in the morning in the mechanic's hangar working with them to get things done, or out on the line, maybe throwing luggage into an airplane because they were able to turn the airplanes around in 15 minutes as opposed to 30, 35 minutes of, say, Delta. That's level 5 leaders. They're not looking to make a big name for themselves. They're looking to just be that leader that everybody respects, be that leader that's willing to get down and work with their employees and set the example, have time for their employees, and so on and so forth. You got to have a plan and execute. You got to choose the assessment mode. Are you going to bring somebody in for an external assessment, managed assessment, or are you going to have the managed / self-assessment like what we plan on doing, which is we have a department that we're dedicated to assessing within our organization, or self-assessment. Are you going to try to figure it out yourself within your departments? Have your department leaders, your managers figure it out. The more managers involved is probably better than just one. Again, you got to decide exactly what you're assessing and how. You got to implement the assessment. You got to start assessing. But again, that comes down to what questions are you going to ask? You're just not going to go in there and ask people just random questions that you have written down on your clipboard. You got to think more. You got to engage more on your questions and maybe word them more for the fact finding that you're trying to do, so you can get a proper assessment to report back to the people who wanted the assessment to begin with, which goes along with implement the assessment. It's important to stick to the assessment plan. And you put together everything you want to assess, how you're going to assess it, the questions you're going to ask, but you don't want to get sidetracked. You don't want to go off on a different limb, because it's just going to muddy up the assessment, and you may be looking at stuff that's just irrelevant to what you originally wanted to assess. So you got to be strict and staying with your assessment plan, which goes with the last one: do not get off course of your assessment plan. Same thing, just stick to the plan. Don't get sidetracked. Maybe things that you're discovering, you may want to take note of them for when you come up for around the cycle of assessment after you report what your findings and how to fix them, possible solutions, how to fix the problems you said, or solutions to make things even better, whatever. You come back around, you remember how you got sidetracked just slightly. I figure you can raise those questions. I guess that's one of the beauty of the assessments is it's like opening a can of worms. There's so much you can look at, so many different avenues that you just, after you do one assessment plan and you report back and revise, and you can do it again and answer all the questions that came up during the previous assessment. And then you want to report your findings, continue the assessment cycle. Just as I was just talking about, you report your findings, discuss what you discovered. You want to analyze what's working, what isn't. I mean, really look at it, because sometimes at that moment, it may be the best thing going, the best possible way to do things. But you got to analyze it. Perhaps there's a different way, and if there is a way, if you know there's a better way of productivity or a better way of leadership, perhaps the person isn't using the right leadership style. Maybe you're using a democratic and participative style when it requires maybe authoritarian in that mode. Maybe the people that are under them aren't so seasoned that they still need that guidance of authoritarian type style leadership, more directing leadership. So you just got to brainstorm the possible solutions to stuff like that. Perhaps the production line isn't so streamlined, and you notice something that if you change the position of something to go along with this machine and where you position the operator, it can go much faster. It's so much to it. And then, but when you come up with these possible solutions and you choose the best ones, sort of like the scientific problem-solving ideas, you got to figure ways to implement the possible solutions. You're just not going to make change immediately. You got to get with the managers and the department heads and figure ways to ease into it. And so you got to inform people why this change is coming. You got to get them to buy in that it's an improvement. It's for the better. You're just not trying to mess with them because you can. And then after everything is all implemented and all your assessment ideas have been implemented and everything's operating according to your assessment goals, you reassess again. And then back into that cycle. Assessment it really doesn't stop. You got to keep doing it. You got to keep up with the environment, with your customers' needs. Maybe new laws have come down. Maybe government put more regulations. You're working in an automotive factory and they want you to get better gas mileage. And so you got to figure out how to do that sort of stuff. You got to implement the changes. There's so many forces that can that you got to keep up with. lots of environmental forces. You got government, you got weather, you got personnel, you got customers. It's all kinds of stakeholders. It goes way beyond your employees and your organization. The customer is right outside the door. So much to the environment. And these are my references. And like I said, I only had 6 weeks to pick up on all this. I had a short time to get this, what we'll call it a crash course lesson, just to familiarize you with assessing what we're trying to do. And I think we got to have a plan to assess. We got to pick the mode. We got to pick the model that we're going to assess with. We got to decide what we're going to assess, or who we're going to assess, or both. We got to look at the environment that we're assessing in. We have the culture has a big deal with production and motivation. When you assess, you pick up stuff that you see you could use improvement on, and then you report back. You may have ways to improve all that stuff. And then once all that's implemented and you figure a way to implement all these changes to your assessment, then you reassess. And it's a continuous cycle. I hope that you learned from my quick course on assessment. Said I had 6 weeks to learn all this, and now I'm giving you a quick course, and we'll go from there. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next meeting.